Should reproductive health care related to abortions be covered by federal privacy laws? The attorneys general in 19 states, including Missouri's, say no.
They signed a letter last month demanding the Biden administration roll back an expansion of HIPAA. Our Capitol Bureau Chief Reporter Joe McLean has more from Jefferson City.
The federal government is looking at changing HIPAA so that if someone were to travel for an abortion to another state where it's legal, that medical information could not be used by the state for any criminal, civil, or administrative investigations or proceedings. Maggie Olivia had to go to another state for an abortion twice.
I was forced to leave my home. I was forced to see a different provider than the provider that I already know and trust and have a relationship with.
She now works with Abortion Action Missouri, a nonprofit working to expand and enshrine reproductive rights in the state.
Right now, what little expectation of privacy that we did have about our pregnancy outcomes can no longer be assumed.
The Attorney General of Missouri and those of 18 other states sent a letter last month demanding that the Biden administration drop the rule, saying it relies on the assumption that states are attempting to criminalize pregnant citizens and abortion providers, which the letter says is a false narrative. It says, quote, rather than respect the decisions of some states to regulate abortion, the Biden administration has instead sought to wrest control over abortion back from the people and their elected representatives. Notably, the people largely support abortion rights in Missouri, according to recent data from the Public Religion Research Institute. When polled last year, 59% of Missourians said abortion should be legal in most or all cases. Also, only 39% in Missouri said they favor or strongly favor the overturning of Roe v. Wade. The state's largest anti-abortion group, Missouri Right to Life, didn't respond to my request today, but many remain ideologically opposed to abortion, believing that the unborn have a right to existence and that it should outweigh the mother's right to bodily autonomy. This question could be settled by Missouri voters next year if efforts to put an abortion question on the statewide ballot succeed. In Jefferson City, Joe McLean, KY3 News.